Republicans just lost Generation Z. This, one of the biggest bright moments of my days and my life these days is watching these young people, young people in 20s who are coming up in the world and are just saying, we're not going to take it anymore. We are sick and tired of being shot at school. We are sick and tired of the minimum wage being at $7.25 an hour. We are sick and tired of not being able to join a union when we get a job at Amazon or Starbucks. We're sick of not having health care. We're sick and tired of going into debt to the tune of, enough to just lock out life opportunities just to get a damn education. Generation Z is awake. They are having none of this Republican stuff that we kind of seem to put up with for most of my life. I mean, there was a lot of pushback to it prior to the Reagan Revolution, but we've had 40 years now of basically Republican policies, even being enforced by a couple of Democratic presidents. And Bill Clinton and Barack Obama both did a lot of good things, but they also continued many Republican policies, many of these neoliberal policies. And these young people, the Generation Z, they're not having it. They know what neoliberalism is. They know what a failure it's been. They totally get it. I mean, after the shooting in Nashville last month, you had all these young people show up. I mean, it was all ages and all races and genders and everything else, showed up at the Capitol building there, but there were a lot of young people, in part because 2 of the 3 legislators who were being expelled by Republicans were young people themselves. They were Zoomers also. Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. And now, Republicans, now we've got, there's another shooting here now. This is, in Louisville in a bank. Last week, Ted Cruz had made an offhand comment apparently about how, well, yeah, if we had more guns than people were in banks with guns, things would be safer. Right, so a guy buys a gun, walks into a bank in Louisville, kills 5 people. One of the police officer was shot in the head, is still in critical condition. Brilliant, Ted. Representative Jones of Tennessee, Justin Jones, said, your overreaction to his Republican colleagues, your overreaction, your flexing of false power has awakened a generation of people who will let you know that your time is up. These old white Republicans in the Tennessee legislature sitting around going, yeah, right. They don't realize their time is up. There is a new generation coming up, and they are wide awake. They know what's going on. These young people are not buying the BS that's coming out of Fox so-called news, right-wing hate radio, and all this stuff. In fact, just consider some of these statistics. These are 18 to 29-year-olds, right, which is Zoomers. 63% of them think that gun laws should be stricter. 70% of 18 to 29-year-olds voted for John Fetterman in Pennsylvania when they went back and looked at that election. In fact, across the nation in the 2022 election, of the Gen Z voters who actually showed up to vote, and they're starting to show up to vote in substantial numbers, 77% of them nationwide voted for Democrats for Congress. I don't think we've ever seen numbers like that on a generational basis. I may be wrong. I don't have the statistics for every generation, for every, past, 50, 60, 70 years. But I don't, I've been doing this a long time, and I don't recall anybody, ever seeing a number like that. 77%, 87% of the students in Wisconsin who voted in the race for Supreme Court Justice, 87% of them voted for the candidate most closely aligned with the Democratic Party, Janet Prestowitz, however you say her last name, Judge Janet. And now that, you know, the leading cause of death for children in America is bullets, I don't think Gen Z is going to vote for a Republican for a long, long time. I remember the early 1970s, after Richard Nixon went down in flames, and everybody saw how incredibly corrupt the Republican Party was, and said, you know, I mean, you know, there were, Kevin Phillips, I believe, wrote a book about it. You know, this is the end of the Republican Party. I mean, there were people thinking the Republican Party was just never going to hold power again. And then Jude Wanniski came along in 1977 with his two Santa Claus theory, and that just, like, you know, the sun opened up. Oh yeah, when Republicans get the White House, and, you know, Reagan was the next one to do that, spend money like a drunken sailor, and then as soon as a Democrat comes in, and give huge tax cuts to the very, very rich, and then as soon as the Democrat comes in, starts screaming about the deficit caused by your tax cuts for rich people. They've been doing it ever since. They're still doing it. And now, to really, you know, put the screws to Generation Z, to Zoomers, you've got Republicans saying, hey, let's raise the Social Security retirement age, but don't worry for you older people right now who vote Republican. We're not going to do it to you. We're going to do it to these young people who vote overwhelmingly Democratic. That's going to endear them to the GOP, right? Remember in 2005, after George W. Bush got reelected, and he gave that speech where he talked about how I earned a bunch of political capital in this election, and I intend to spend it to privatize Social Security. And he went on it was going to be an over 20-city tour to promote the idea of converting Social Security into individual private retirement accounts administered by Wall Street banks. And after 5-6 cities, every time he spoke someplace, the idea of privatizing Social Security became less popular, and finally he gave up. He said, okay, that's it, screw that. And he started painting or something. I don't know what he did, but you know, we just went back to torturing people in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this is what they want to do. This is what Reagan did. See, I mean, somehow these guys think that Reagan's playbook will still work. In 1983, Ronald Reagan wanted to begin the privatization of Social Security. And so he did a couple of things. Number one, he made Social Security income taxable. Used to be you didn't pay income taxes on Social Security income. Now you do. You could thank Ronald Reagan for that. Number two, he significantly increased the amount of tax that you pay into the Social Security Trust Fund, but not for rich people. They put a cap on this, on the amount of money. Now, the cap goes all the way back to the origin of Social Security in 1935, but they capped it out in 1983 at, my recollection is it was around $40,000 back then. And, you know, it's risen up to, it's around $150,000 right now. But if you make more than $150,000 a year, and there's a lot of people in America who do, you don't pay a single penny on the additional income in taxes to support Social Security. Reagan could have fixed that. In fact, if he had done away with the cap, Social Security would be solvent forever. But Reagan wasn't interested in making Social Security solvent forever. He was interested in starting the process of privatizing it. That's why they rolled out 401ks back then. It was like, hey, you know, let's get people used to this, and we'll subsidize it with a tax break. Is Gen Z going to go along with raising the retirement age like Reagan did? Because in '83, Reagan raised the retirement age to 67, but he didn't have it kick in until last year or the year before. I mean, he put like 40 years of space between himself and that increase in the retirement age because he knew the consequences would not make him popular. And today, when they talk about, well, the retirement age for Social Security just went up to 67, nobody says because Ronald Reagan did it. So that's what Republicans now are trying to do. They want to take it up to 70. You know, while in France, people are in the streets because Macron raised it from 62 to 64. Here, the Republicans want to raise it from 67 to 70. But it'll only kick in for those people who are in their 20s right now, don't you know? Right. You think Gen Z is ever going to vote Republican? They'd have to be nuts. I'm telling you, we are looking at the fourth turning here. We are looking at the end of a generational cycle of four. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check hartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club, Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson, who was a guest on our program a while back. This is from page 86. One of the great privileges of whiteness is not to see color, not to see race, and not to pay a price for ignoring it, except, of course, when you're called on it. But even then, the price pales quite literally in comparison to the high price black folk pay for being black. We pay a price, too, for not even being able to derive recognition and financial reward for the styles that make the world want to be black so bad that they don't mind looking like us as long as they never, ever have to be us. If the appropriators can freely rip off our culture with no consequences, those who revise racial history, the fourth stage of white racial grief, are even less accountable for their deeds. The way of the racial revisionist when it comes to black life and history is simply to rewrite it. Their motto is, it didn't happen that way. There's a flood of writing that tells us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but about an effort to defend states' rights. But, my friend, you've got to put yourself in our place and see the absurdity of such a claim. Defend the rights of states to do what? To enslave blacks. But even here, the irresistible logic of whiteness, that is irresistible to whites themselves, and to all of us who are subjected to white whim, springs into full action. White American history is so powerful that even when it loses, it wins, at least in skirmishes within whiteness itself. From the right wing, there is the belief that the Civil War was fought over the ability of individual states to beat back a federal government out to impose its will. From the left wing, there's the belief that the Civil War was a conflict between the planter class and the proletariat. In each case, race as the main reason for the war is skillfully rewritten, or really written out. Slavery is rewritten too. Some white Christian apologists contend that black folk needed slavery to save their souls or to rescue their cultures. A contemporary twist on this argument radiates in thinkers like Dinesh D'Souza, who claims that American blacks brought here through slavery are now doing far better than their African kin. Some white critics argue that since blacks sold other blacks into slavery, bondage was a black man's problem, not a white man's burden. But revisionists would much rather describe the dehumanization of black folk as little more than a commercial transaction. It's another way of washing their hands of racial responsibility. The effort to rewrite history surfaces in how Malcolm X is treated in the mainstream. It hardly seems likely that the culture he fought with all his heart could be depended on to grasp his true meaning.
Malcolm is often read as an apostle of violence, as a frightful figure consumed by destructive rage. Yet the truth is far more complex, and Malcolm was far more complicated. But isn't the autobiography of Malcolm X so enduringly appealing because it shows Malcolm giving up hatred as a means to racial justice? Now, Malcolm X believed in the liberation of black folk from the mental and psychological chains of white supremacy. He was not committed to nonviolence as a way of life or as a method of social strategy. He believed that such a commitment prevents the full realization of black emancipation. Yet he was not personally violent. As Ossie Davis says in his eulogy, responding to the claim that Malcolm preached hate and was a fanatic and a racist, quote, "Did you even talk to Brother Malcolm? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance?" End quote. The rage that flowed in Malcolm's veins was the rage against a force of whiteness that aimed to wash its black kin from the face of the earth. The urge to rewrite black history occasionally gives way to the final stage of white racial grief, which is simply, when it comes to race, dilute it. That is, to argue that black stuff doesn't just plague black folk. To summarize, bad stuff happens to everyone. This argument surfaced in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that storm certainly hit black folk, but it hit white folk too. This is the sordid version of reverse American exceptionalism. It is the same Me Too impulse that flares in the bitter battle against affirmative action. Beloved, I can't help but notice that affirmative action is the bee in so many of your bonnets. You look around in your classrooms and you think every black person is there because they got an unfair shake from the system. You look at your job and you think that your black coworker got an unjust nod of approval from the powers that be. You never stop to think how the history of whiteness in America is one long scroll of affirmative action. You never stop to think that Babe Ruth never had to play the greatest players of his generation, just the greatest white players. You never stop to think that most of our presidents never rose to the top because they bested the competition, only just the white competition. White privilege is a self-selecting tool that keeps you from having to compete with the best. The history of white folk gaining access to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale is the history of white folk deciding ahead of the game that you are superior. You argue that slots in school should be reserved for your kin because, after all, they are smarter, more disciplined, better suited, and more deserving than inferior blacks. That's like concluding that the Cleveland Cavaliers can't possibly win the NBA championship because they're down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors. Throw in the towel and call it a series. But they must play the series to determine the winner. Whiteness is having all the advantages on your side, the referees blowing the whistle for you, the arena packed with only your fans. In fact, whiteness means you never even have to play the game at all, at least not in head-to-head matchups with the talent and skill of black folks. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, are you ready for a really big show? There's a lot going on in the world today and a lot to talk about. Can we keep Gen Zers from fleeing America? Seriously, this is just an amazing new study. I'll tell you about it in just a moment. Also, our quote for the day, Chip Roy, quote, "One thing, I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, one that I can go campaign on and say we did. One." It's incredible. Is he watching my program? I mean, I've been saying this for, I've been doing this show 20 years, and all those 20 years we've had this contest. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute. Anyway, we'll get to that. Also, how Mike Johnson got played. I told you about this yesterday, how, this sneaky trick that the Republicans were going to play with these 2 continuing resolutions. I didn't realize at the time that, and neither did Mike Johnson, that somebody pulled a switcheroo on him, and he got screwed big time. I'll tell you all about that in this first hour. And also, do you have compassion fatigue? Do you think about it? Wars, hate talk, homelessness, pandemics. There are things we can do about that. So we'll talk about all those things in the first hour of the program. To kick off the second hour of our program today, Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent in Kiev, Ukraine, is going to weigh in on the situation in Ukraine. Oh, also, just FYI, tomorrow's first hour, this hour tomorrow, is going to be a full hour with Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls, just FYI. Is a national abortion ban coming? That'll be in our second hour today. Also coming to a Republican-controlled town near you, Murphysboro, Tennessee, just outlawed being gay in public. I'm not talking about having sex, just being gay in public. And a crazy alert, the Republican Party has a new January 6th conspiracy theory, deep state ghost buses. Yeah. In the third hour of our program, Dr. Michael Mann, the world-famous climate scientist, is going to drop by. James Hansen says if it weren't for the aerosols that we're producing, all the particles in the air, we would have PETM levels of warming, which would kill most of humanity. What's up with that? We'll talk about that in the third hour of the program. But I want to start with my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Can We Keep Gen Zers from Fleeing America? This blew my mind. I mean, you know, we've had conversations on this program before, and it inevitably happens, you know, when somebody calls in and says, you know, I'm thinking about moving overseas. You know, I'm sick and tired of this stuff. And then they, you know, well, I have, you know, my grandparents were from Germany, or my great-grandparents were from Ireland or Italy or what have you, know, fill in the blanks. And so it's like, you know, I think I'll go there. And then they call up the consulate or whatever. I did this in 2001 after George Bush was elected. Called the Norwegian consulate and said, okay, what's involved in moving my family to Norway? And turns out it's not something that I would be able to do. I mean, you have to be fluent in Norwegian. You have to bring $250,000. You have to, it's just all kinds of stuff. And, you know, people will call up and go, you know, I can't do this, unfortunately. But I've been thinking about it. Well, this website, Preply is the website. It's a site that offers tutors in foreign languages. And it's a huge site. I mean, they have millions of users, or over 1 million. They did a national survey that was published a couple of weeks ago. It involved over 3,000 Gen Zers. And, you know, just asking them their opinion of life in America, life in other countries, and what their plans are. And to their shock, what they found was about 56% of them are seriously thinking about moving out of the United States. Half of Gen Zers, according to this survey, are saying, you know, I'm thinking of leaving. The top 10 countries that they were thinking of moving to were the UK, Canada, which isn't that far away, Japan, Netherlands, Singapore, Switzerland, Australia, Germany, Ireland, or Italy. And then they said, okay, you want to move away, why? And what they found was the number one consideration, which was about a little over a quarter of all the people who were thinking of leaving the country, wanted to do so because they wanted to move to a country that had free health care and free college education, or inexpensive, you know, where you don't go broke because somebody in the family gets sick, or you can go to college. And I mean, you know, many of these countries that I just named actually pay you to go to college. You don't have to pay them. So, you know, here we are. I mean, Republicans have fought any effort to institute Medicare for all or anything like it. I mean, 12 red states won't even expand Medicaid, for God's sake. So the United States is literally the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care system and has millions of people without any health insurance whatsoever. We're the only country in the world where 500,000 people go bankrupt. Families lose everything, go bankrupt every year. 500,000 families because somebody in the family got sick. Literally, this does not happen in any of those countries that I just named. And Gen Zers know it. I mean, the one big advantage that they have over my generation is that when they were growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, the early 2000s, they had the internet and social media. They were able to see what life is like in other countries, whereas we just had to read about it, you know, or watch a TV special or something. We had no idea, really. I mean, I was in the 1980s when Louise and I and our 3 kids moved to Germany for a year. You know, I had no idea what to expect, and I'd been in Germany a lot of times. But, you know, you learn when you get there. Well, anyhow, young people today are figuring this stuff out, and they're looking at America, and they're saying, you know, this kind of sucks. You know, similarly, because Reagan ended free college in California, and then as president took a meat axe to the education department budget. America is also the only developed nation in the country that has this thing called student debt as a widespread thing. American students are carrying almost $2 trillion in college debts, 1.71 right now. Another 17%, so that was 26%. Another 17% said that they wanted to move out of America because they wanted to get away from toxic politics, Republican politics. while all 10 of their top 10 countries have right-wing, racist, nativist parties, in none of them are those parties, you know, one of the two major parties and on the verge of taking over the entire country. 1 in 7 of the Gen Zers told the researchers that they wanted to feel safer, particularly from the omnipresent American risk of being shot or to experience lower levels of stress. 1 in 7. Shootings are the leading cause of death for children in the United States. And, you know, every single one of those top 10 countries has rigorous gun control laws. So you add these numbers up and you find that escaping Republican policies, escaping guns, and escaping right-wing hate are the main motivations for 56.9% of Gen Zers who are thinking about moving out of the United States. Only 8.8% want to move out to get a better job, and only 18.9% were interested in a new cultural experience, which, by the way, might mean getting the hell out of this toxic political environment. I mean, we look at countries that young people are fleeing from. Most of the people coming to our southern border, for example, they're not my age. They're in their 20s. You know, they're bringing little children with them. A lot of them are teenagers, but certainly teenagers and in their 20s, occasionally in their 30s, but it's mostly young people. It's Gen Z people who are fleeing Venezuela, who are fleeing Guatemala, and they're showing up on our southern border. And we look at that and we say, oh, look at those young people fleeing those countries. It must be that, you know, those countries are a failed state. There must be some kind of political crisis going on in those nations. And there is. I mean, you know, it's a signal. It's a sign. We're not seeing people trying to flee Canada, for example. I mean, you know, they've got Medicare for all in Canada. They've got, you know, relatively inexpensive college. The state schools, you know, the colleges are free to cheap. Why would they want to flee? And the risk of getting shot because somebody got pissed off at the way you were driving is, you know, pretty much non-existent in Canada. There's no huge exodus of Canadians, you know, trying to sneak over our northern border, and no rational politician is arguing that we should build a wall with Canada. I mean, I get it. Ramaswamy said that, but he's a fool. He's a clown, actually, is what he is. But here in America, 40 years of neoliberal Reaganomics have gutted America's middle class, cutting us from 2/3 of America down to 43% of America. They've taken $50 trillion out of the pockets of working class people and put it into the money bins of the morbidly rich. 3 American billionaires today own more wealth than the bottom 50% of Americans, 166 million people. Reagan's policies have made nearly 1,000 Americans into billionaires, where there were only 13 of them when he came into office, and the richest had only $6 billion. This is how bad it's gotten. When my boomer generation was the same average age as the millennial generation is today, in other words, in their 30s, back in 1990, my generation held 21.3% of the entire nation's wealth. The millennials today, being the same age as I was in the 1990s, and being about the same size population as the boomers, slightly smaller, but nonetheless, they own only 4.6% of the nation's wealth. That's millennials. Zoomers, it's even worse. Kinsey just did a study of Gen Z and found this cohort is going through, it looks like, a decline in economic opportunities. Saving for retirement seems out of reach and will become even harder. Almost 60% of Gen Zers say their basic needs are not being met. The Fed, the St. Louis Fed, issued a report just last week in which they said, and I quote, in the second quarter of 2023, younger Americans owned 70 cents for every $1 of wealth owned by Gen Xers on average at the same age. So we got all this hand-wringing about immigrants wanting to come into the United States. I think we need to start being concerned about, you know, our own young people who want to leave the United States. You know, before we, again, wave this flag of, oh, American exceptionalism, aren't we wonderful? We need to make the United States a country where people want to stay and build their lives and build their families. And until we do that, until we repudiate Reaganism, until we adopt the progressive agenda that was you know, the baseline for America from 1933 to 1981, that brought us unionization and a minimum wage and unemployment insurance and the EPA and OSHA and the FDA and the US, all these programs that brought us free college education. Yes, we had free college education across the United States up until the Reagan administration. Until we go back to those progressive values, we can't claim to be the greatest country in the world because our own young people, our own children, our own wannabe expats give the lie to that label. So what do you think? I'll be back with how Mike Johnson got played and an amazing clip from Chip Roy and your calls after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. And welcome back. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi. Let me take you. I just wanted to say that when I was hearing you talk about health care and all that, regardless of all the Medicare Advantage that you've been speaking about properly, I do want to say to all the listeners that this kind of extreme capitalism that's being demonstrated from, people from Reagan on to the present are very anti-human, and should I say, as an extremist that I am, maybe genocidal. It's a genocidal behavior that's going on because
it
of
has
what
certainly
it does
killed millions of Americans
to the human race. Yes, it's a slow motion, kinder, gentler, as Daddy Bush would say, kinder, gentler genocide.
Yep.
And this is the kind of thing that needs to be shaken off, and it's not going to be shaken off if we just revert to the same two-party, two-dimensional system we've been saddled with.
So you want to amend the Constitution?
Something needs to change. The instant runoff voting, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, neither are you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the only way you're going to get rid of a two-party system is through, as you said,
I understand you're
voting.
Part of the two-party system, sir. That's why I don't quite trust you.
I'm okay.
You have a nice day.
Okay, thank you, John. I am a fan of instant runoff voting, for the record. Connie in Shady Grove, Oregon. Hey, Connie, what's up?
I want to know what you think of Manchin, Joe Manchin.
I think he's a pathetic egomaniac.
There you go. I do too. Thank you.
Is that it?
I want to know what you think. Okay.
That's all you want. I mean, I saw the clip this morning. He was, I guess, Kristen Welker interviewed him. And I watched the interview, and he was saying, well, the Democrats have gone so far to the left, and they've got to come back to the middle. And I was waiting for Kristen Welker to say, well, what do you mean by so far to the left? What is the policy that you're objecting to? Is it supporting unionization? Is it supporting cleaning up our environment? Is it supporting abortion? What is it that is too far to the left? And she never asked him. And I'm sitting here going, how can you have somebody attack? I mean, he's attacking Biden. He's attacking the Democrats. He's attacking the nation, frankly, and in completely general terms. And she had an opportunity. I don't know. It just makes me crazy. She had an opportunity to find out exactly what he's talking about, or to put him on the spot and point out that he doesn't have anything that he's talking about. I mean, basically, the whole no labels thing is being funded by Harlan Crow. I mean, he's the biggest funder.
Oh.
Yeah, the guy who has been grooming Clarence and Ginny Thomas for almost 20 years. Is the largest, at least that we know of. They don't publish their numbers, but there has been, some, people can look at the tax returns. And it appears that Harlan Crow is the largest funder of no labels, which is the group that is putting up this whole presidential thing that Joe Manchin thinks he's going to play in. I think it's just pathetic. Connie, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said, the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So Chip Roy went off yesterday and said what I have been saying for a long, long time on this, for literally 20 years on this program. I've been running this contest. By the way, somebody kind of won my contest a couple of weeks ago, and I hope you're listening. Forgive me for not remembering your name, who had found one small piece of legislation that the Republicans passed that might benefit people, and it was years ago. And I said, send me an email and I'll send you a book. And he sent me an email, and now I've lost it. I'm sorry. I have no idea where it is. So send me that email again, and I'll send you an autographed book. But anyhow, here's what Texas Congressman Chip Roy had to say yesterday on the floor of the House. No? Oh.
That I can go campaign on and say we did.
Again, Nate, because we didn't have the audio up. I'm sorry.
I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, that I can go campaign on and say we did. One material, meaningful, significant thing the Republican majority has done.
Yeah, well, that I can go home and tell my colleagues that I did, yes. You can't find one thing. Well, maybe you could find, a couple of little things, I suppose. But any consequential, what have Republicans done for you in the last 40 years? Seriously. I mean, I got nothing, right? If I said in my lifetime, I'd have to go back to the 1950s. And President Eisenhower actually did a lot for America. But after Reagan, really after Nixon, nothing. So I think it's just hysterical. I expect that you're going to see Democrats turning that into a campaign ad. And they should. They absolutely should. I think, one of the most successful or one of the most fun things that I've done on this program all these years is, if a Republican calls, we have standing, our call screener, now it's Mark, it was Joyce before, it was Nate before that. I mean, we've had a bunch of call screeners over the years. It was Louise to start out. Our call screeners have standing instructions. If a Republican calls and says, I'm a Republican and I want to disagree with Tom, you go to the front of the line. You're the first person I put on the air. I love to hear from Republicans. And the question I always ask is, what has your party done for us? What has it done for America? Please name one thing. And if you can successfully name one thing of any consequence at all that Republicans have done for the American people that doesn't primarily benefit billionaires or big corporations, I mean, there are some things that had some secondary benefit to us, but the main goal of it was benefiting, billionaires. You can find that one thing, I'll send you an autographed book. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I have to tell you how Mike Johnson got owned yesterday. This is hysterical. And then I'll pick up your calls. Stay with us. Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the
the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page and a half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849 and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors. Such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. The Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother. She would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Two quick stories here to share with you, and then I'll pick up your phone call. The first, the latter continuing resolution. Remember yesterday I was telling you how this in the past, well, it kind of goes back to Newt Gingrich. Back in the 1990s, I believe it was 96, it might have been 97, Newt Gingrich came up with this idea that he could use the debt ceiling, this 1917 law, it was called the Second Liberty Bond Act, that said that Congress must cap its debt and must change that cap. And Congress had just routinely changed the cap every year right up until the 90s, from 1917 all the way into the 90s. And Gingrich looked at this and said, hey, we've got this old law in the books. We can use this as a club to beat up Bill Clinton with. And they did. They shut down the government. But the problem was they shut down the whole government, which meant that our military wasn't being paid, our TSA wasn't being paid, air traffic controllers weren't being paid. There's a lot of bad consequences to this that really pissed people off. So what Mike Johnson came up with, the brilliant idea he came up with is, let's take all that stuff that'll piss people off if it doesn't get paid and put that into one continuing resolution, which we will extend on January 19th. We'll just, it'll be just fine, and we'll take care of that so that we don't end up with people pissed off at us. And then we'll take the stuff that we really want to cut that won't, hit the news media in a big way. The money for women and infant children, money for foreign aid, money to Ukraine, money to or Israel, money that that funds the welfare programs, money that basically all that stuff, right? And we'll throw that into a second package that will vote on, instead of on January 19th, on February 2nd, and we'll just refuse to vote on that one. That's where we will plant our flag in the sand. That's where we will have, Custer's last stand here. This is where we're going to fight our battle, is on the social stuff after on January 19th we have funded the military, right? So originally the way they had this set up was that it was going to be military and veterans affairs, energy and water, agriculture, which includes farm supports, transportation, and housing. All of that would be revisited on January 19th. That's all the stuff that's big headline stuff. And then on February 2nd, it would be funding for the Department of State, the Department of Justice, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, and other executive departments, all of which the Republicans want to shut down. David Koch ran for vice president in 1980 on literally closing every single one of those offices. Maybe not State Department, but certainly all the rest of them. So, they thought they had this. This is going to be super slick. And I told you yesterday, I said, this is going to be a real problem. These guys have figured it out. I mean, Mike Johnson has broken the code. Well, it turns out that at the very last minute, the drafts got changed. The draft bills that would do this, and now, and Mike Johnson didn't notice this, so now the January 19th expiration date no longer includes defense or homeland security. Defense and homeland security got moved into the February 2nd tranche, which means it's going to blow up in their face. What, you don't want to fund the Pentagon? You don't want to fund the FBI and the police agencies? And the Border Patrol, the military funding of the Border Patrol, they all got stuck into this February date. And so the Republicans are like, they're just going nuts right now. This is not a big story in the national news. And because it requires that kind of explanation that I just shared with you, it's not a quick and easy explanation because you have to understand what the scheme was in the first place in order to understand how it got foiled. But they are going nuts. They're, Mike Johnson and his buddies, they're talking about there's a mole in here, there's a traitor in our party, there's a Judas backstabber. These are all phrases that they've used in the last 24 hours. He thought, this moron, he thought he had the Democrats over the barrel. And somebody slipped in, somebody slightly changed the language, and he pushed it through, and everybody voted for it, or the Democrats certainly all voted for it. All but 92 Republicans voted against, or something in that neighborhood. I guess it was in the high 80s, because there was a couple of Democrats who also voted no. Just incredible. I was going to talk about empathy and sympathy, but I'll move that into later in the program because I've been talking too long here. Let's pick up your calls. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, can I just add, for the edification of the audience, the other issue with government shutdown has to do with the one we are in now. With the fiscal year comes, we got the debt ceiling thing passed, but the fiscal year ends on September 30th, and it was because of the Congressional Budget Act, Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act of 1974 that was interpreted, I believe, by Jimmy Carter's Secretary of Treasury, that the government, if we don't have a budget or a appropriations made by October 1st, the government is technically out of money. And so that came off because that's what the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act, which was passed oddly by Richard Nixon, signed it 3 weeks before he resigned, and that came on the heels of one of the things that Donald Trump wanted to do was Richard Nixon did not like the appropriations that the Democratic Congress made, and so he would just take them. And this is why Donald Trump was impeached for the first time. It's not what he said to Zelensky about find me dirt on Joe Biden. It was because he took money from the Congress for Ukraine and didn't spend it within the 45-day appropriation period, and he didn't apply for an extension, and he didn't give it back. Right. He pocketed it, essentially, and used it as a cudgel over Ukraine. So he was in violation of that law, and because the law doesn't prescribe any penalties, and the president can't be penalized anyway, the only option was to impeach him. But that was the other thing about that.
Interesting.
But on to your opening topic, the United States is way overrated and highly overrated and way overpriced. Yeah. That's just the and let's just examine. Do we really have? And the reason is we're way overrated is essentially because we're way overpriced, and this all came from the Reagan era, because we have this giant class of billionaires, and we don't really have a free market anymore. We have markets run by crime bosses, and you look at any industry. Deregulation has led to like the airline industry, the telecommunication industry. We don't have choices. We are basically paying to colluders. It's collusion in every industry. Isn't that true?
Yeah, it's monopoly. That's why I'm syndicating my Monopoly book this year.
So we just keep having to pay higher and higher prices for everything, including health care. And it's just when that happens, when you're paying such high premiums on even necessities, the quality of life is not, and the degree of happiness in the United States, other people around the world are much happier. And, like Aristotle said, unlimited choices and unlimited wealth is not necessary for liberty. It's just not, those aren't necessary. But we are convinced that we need to have every kind of choice and as much money as we can possibly get. And yeah, it's overrated. And let me ask you this. Do we really have that much more freedom with our Constitution than do other countries, other Western democracies think that, oh, boy, we wish we had the freedoms that the United States have, like freedom to be shot and stuff like that? Right. You remember Roosevelt's four freedoms? Freedom of expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear.
Right.
Well, I think we've got plenty of want and plenty of fear in this country,
Yep.
not the least of which is due to one of our great rights, the Second Amendment. And that's what has stolen our quality of life and made our country highly overrated and way overpriced since the Reagan era.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. We have the freedom to be shot. We have the freedom to go bankrupt if somebody in our family gets sick. We have the freedom to graduate college with $100,000 in debt. I mean, it's like, really? Good points,
Well,
Paul.
Look at this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the Congress, it says in Article 1, Section 8, the Congress manages or regulates rules for bankruptcy, and yet one of the things they did was in the 90s, they made it that you could not declare bankruptcy for student loans, and I don't think
That
you
was
can
in
declare
2005.
bankruptcy can't declare bankruptcy for medical debts either.
Yep. Oh, I didn't know about the medical debt. I thought you could declare bankruptcy for medical debt, but I know the student loan one because I got in a debate with Debbie Stabenow about it on this program in 2005. She was one of the advocates for that banking reform legislation.
Mm-hmm. Well, the fact that you can go into bankruptcy from medical debt is we shouldn't be having that conversation either.
No, it's 500,000 Americans every year go bankrupt because of medical debt, and that's that is a crime. It's a crime against humanity. Paul, thank you.
Right.
Well said as always. It's 44 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann program, speaking the truths. The multinational corporations who run these monopolies would really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back with more of your calls. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's the place where despair is not an option. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
I'd like to jump on your previous caller. And by the way, I really like it when he calls up because he has
Paul?
a lot of knowledge about things.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
He is.
Just piggybacking on him, I'm sure you remember the time, and it wasn't all that many decades ago, when there was the merger mania.
Yeah, that was the 80s. You know, that was after Reagan. In 1983, Reagan stopped enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act and its heirs, and so we had this M&A mania that really peaked in 86, 87, 88. Yeah, I remember it well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem right there. I wrote a paper actually when I was in college. And you know, I went to two different colleges, and I reused the same paper a year after I did in the previous one, which, by the way, I got a D because the professor was a right-winger. And then at Santa Clara, he had more of a liberal professor. I got a B minus. But I wrote a paper about the monopoly, and this is in the mid-'70s. Why there was the creation of monopolies. And I remember at that time, I forget who it was, might have been Bethlehem Steel. Somebody bought out a food company. Maybe it was Nestle's. And it's like, you know, that was the basis of my paper. Was there were, at that time already, you had firms that were in one industry buying out firms in a totally different industry.
Right.
And how could that happen? And how would that be good for the American consumer? So, you know, I was onto that back in the mid-'70s. Like, what's going on here? And you know, it just keeps on going and going. Didn't Google buy YouTube? And I don't know who else Google has bought up, but I know YouTube was a lot better before it was bought out by Google. And since then, it's kind of like
Zuckerberg bought Instagram. I mean, you know, this is how these giant companies become giant companies.
Yeah, so I don't like it, and I guess right now Google is being sued under the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Yep.
Good luck. I hope it wins, because the last time we had something like of this magnitude was when Netscape sued Microsoft, and they ended up losing the case at the Supreme Court. So what happened in Netscape? I guess they kind of just disappeared. I don't know about AOL. I still have people on my email list that have AOL, but
Yeah, AOL has become a legacy product, basically.
Yeah, so
just like,
they're not.
Yahoo is making kind of a revival, but they both date back to that era, the mid ’90s.
Right. So, they're not really competitive against Google. I mean, Google is just, the power. If I wanted to make an analogy, I would have to say, look at Russia. They're trying to perhaps reconstitute the Russian Empire. I'm not going to say the USSR. I'm going to say the Russian Empire. And that's why maybe it would be Poland and Moldova, and Belarus is already in the tank after Ukraine. So, as we have to stop Russia and their quest for being their former empire, we have to stop these American corporate empires.
There you go. It's like, Putin's quoting Catherine the Great. I mean, that's a clue. Dennis, thanks for the call. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? But the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. 9 minutes before the hour, Gail in Saugus, Massachusetts. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Tom, thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I enjoy what you have to say, and I always come away learning something new so much.
Thank you.
What I want to address today is what you were talking about earlier about Gen Zers leaving the country for places like the United Kingdom or Canada, some of the other European countries that have national health care. Health care for all.
Yep, and free college.
I can speak to you and your other listeners about what happens in Canada, because my husband and I own properties both in the U.S. and in Canada, and we spend quite a bit of the year at our Canadian home. So we have good neighbors and friends who tell us all about their medical woes. Just recently, one of our neighbors told us that he has to have heart care in the form of some sort of surgery. And, Tom, he's not going to be able to see a cardiologist for this issue for about 9 months.
Yeah, then presumably it's not an emergency. Gail, I get these calls from people from time to time about, oh my God, Canada's healthcare system sucks and people hate it and it's terrible. And then I will get flooded with calls from Canadians saying, what? Gail, don't even try. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
We need a TV show called Generation Huh. We're describing situations we feel generations, different ages, and they don't know, which decade is which. Just like how there's talk of Generation Z's complaining about the 9-to-5 jobs they're finally in. There should be reaction videos of them watching the movie 9 to 5 and the solutions offered there, but were tripped up by Reagan. And we were talking about instant runoffs. I wish we had them here. Then my vote for Nader in 2000 wouldn't have come back to bite me, and I could still be running for mayor.
Yeah, same here. And you know, with instant runoff voting, my vote for Nader in Vermont, I mean, I lived in Vermont in 2000, so would have become a vote for Al Gore, which would have been a fine thing. David, thanks for the call. Les in Winnemucca, and by the way, before I move on to Les, hang on just a second. To our caller, complaining about the Canadian healthcare system, I know people here in the United States had to wait months for surgery. I had to wait months for surgery. So, it's like if it's not an emergency, that's not an unreasonable thing, I suppose. Les, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Thom Hartmann.
Hey.
It's a pleasure to listen to your show every day.
Thank you.
I just got a couple of real quick things to say. GOP, I do believe, stands for Goebbels or Putin.
Okay.
You have a choice. You do have a choice for the GOP. It can be Goebbels, which is the Nikki Haley wing, or Putin, which is the
Trump wing.
Cheese little hands in the party. Anyway, I live in a Red Wing district out here, and a bunch of wonderful people. I love this town. It's a great place to live. We all agree on two things.
Mm-hmm.
One, and I mean everybody, everybody agrees on this. Two things. There's too much money in politics. Too many of them guys floating around Washington, bothering the Congress all day. Got to raise money for elections. There's too much money in politics. And rich folks, super rich, are not paying their fair share of taxes. Now, we all agree on this. I'm not talking about how to solve the problem or anything. I'm just saying that we all agree that these two problems are really, really drivers of a lot of other problems.
Yeah, and you know where they came from, Les? They came from the 5 Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court legalizing political bribery. I mean, this is what we talked about yesterday.
Yeah. Citizens United, you bet.
Yep.
It's the worst decision they've ever made, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep, absolutely.
But GOP, Goebbels or Putin.
Okay, I got it, Les. Thank you. Sherry in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Hey, Sherry, what's up?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I wanted to refer back to the lady who was talking about Joe Manchin.
Mm-hmm.
I heard Karl Rove put it best on a talk show he was on. He said, no labels is a shadow operation for the Republican Party.
Oh, yeah.
And they are.
For sure.
Because if you will stop and think about Joe Manchin's history, he's always been in the pocket of big oil.
Yep.
Always.
And coal.
And,
I mean, he owns a coal company.
Yes.
It made him millions of dollars.
Yes. And so he's out there downing the Democrats, everything. He's slashing at Democrats. And so they are not no labels. They are a shadow operation for the Republican Party. Joe Manchin is not somebody to be trusted.
No, and their largest funder is apparently Harlan Crow.
Yes. Yes.
The guy.
They keep saying.
Go ahead.
They keep saying, "Oh, well, if we see that Trump's going to be elected, we'll pull out." No, they won't.
Yeah, I agree.
No,
and by that point, the damage is done. Excellent point, Sherry. Thank you very much. It is, we're hitting the top of the hour here. Up next, Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent from Kiev, Ukraine, will be giving us an update on what's going on there. It's very much not been in the news lately, so stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms, in our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. For being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent in Kiev, Ukraine. He's got a video blog over on YouTube. Just plug in his name, Philip, P-H-I-L-I-P, Ittner, I-T-T-N-E-R, and you will find it. Ittner Philip is his Twitter handle, by the way. Backwards, last name, first name. And Phil, welcome back to the program. Where are we at with the war?
Well, okay, so I'm back in Kiev. I've been here since late Saturday. Anecdotally, what I've noticed since coming back, aside from the change in the weather, we are definitely out of summer. We're well into fall. Is that we're getting more and longer air raid sirens, and daily. When I left, we would get 2 or 3, occasional ones, maybe 5, 6, 7 sort of thing. But over a week since I've been back, we've gotten one every single day. And they last for very long periods of time. When I was here, right before I left on my short visit back to the States, they would last a half hour, 45 minutes until the skies were cleared, and then the announcement would come out. Now we're getting these daily air raid sirens, and they're lasting for extended periods of time. And not only that, but people are taking them far more seriously than what they were when I left just about a month ago. And that might be because, even though we were getting them kind of inadvertently, occasionally during the week, it was a sense of, the sky is falling and Chicken Little, and people didn't pay attention to it. Something distinctly has changed. People are taking them seriously. Shops close when we get air raid sirens now. People are actively getting off the streets. Now, that might be because they anticipate what we went through last fall and winter, and that was Russia's attempt to deprive the citizens of this city and of this country from heating and power. A much more aggressive campaign last winter and fall. So maybe that's in anticipation of that resumption. But certainly they're taking it more seriously. And the other thing that I have noticed is that with the change in the weather, there is a feeling that we're going to be going through some a hard period of time. I've spoken to my Ukrainian friends when I came back, and the general consensus is, at least amongst those that I've surveyed amongst my groups and friends and colleagues, this is going to be a tough winter.
Yeah,
it's going to be a tough winter. And then, of course, lastly, there's one other thing that I've noticed, and that is the press corps is gone. This is a city where I could go up to the Intercontinental Hotel or the Hyatt up near St. Sofievsky. This is the high point of the city. And the kind of luxury hotels that are up there, and I would inevitably bump into somebody that I knew or knew of in the press corps. That is not the case.
They've all gone to Israel?
Now I am putting one and one together, and also I am talking to my friends in my former field. Yes, they've all gone to Israel. Everybody's gone to the Middle East, which is exactly kind of what part of the point of why Russia was supportive of Hamas's attack was to divert attention from Ukraine. I don't think that's a leap for me to say. We know that Hamas and people in the Kremlin and the Russian Foreign Ministry have been meeting together for quite some time. We know that there was weapon assistance, of course, Iran in the mix of the whole thing, with Iran and drones in Russia. So, Russia wanted the spotlight taken away from what's happening here, and it looks like it has happened because, again, the press corps has a limited amount of finance. I mean, they also are, as a veteran of that industry, notoriously fickle. The newest shiny object that's going to get them the ratings or the clicks or whatever is what's going to get the attention and the money and the manpower. And that's what's happening here.
I totally
Many of the teams have left, and it's sadly happening at a time when there are things happening on the ground here in Ukraine that are pretty significant developments, most notably the fact that Ukrainian armed forces have crossed the river Dnipro along the southern length of the river. And this is a major physical obstacle for both sides in this war. But the Ukrainians have set up a bridgehead on the left bank or the eastern side of the river where the Russians are. And that bridgehead is growing. And even the Russian military itself has had to admit that, yes, the Ukrainians have crossed the river and are taking territory and hold a position on the of the river. Russians would never do that unless it was significant and undeniable. And that's the case. And that's a big deal strategically. We're still having fighting north of that region where the bridgehead has been established. The Russians are launching offensives around Bakhmut and a place called Avdiivka. That's farther up the river, the northern part of the river, and that divide within the country. But, those are not nearly as strategically as important as being able to cross the river. While they continue to fight around the Russians, around places like Bakhmut and Avdiivka, which are really just transportation hubs, of which there are many in that area of the country, there's no real strategic massive advantage for them, even if they do, and they're losing badly, especially in Avdiivka. But even if they were to take these locations, it's just another transport hub. And there are more for the Ukrainians to fall back to as they recede back towards the river. But having crossed over for the Ukrainian forces, that's something new. And that's something that is strategically important. So just as the International Press Corps is diverting its attention, we are actually seeing significant strategic advantages being gained by the Ukrainian forces. There are far less defenses down there, far less minefields down there where they've done their crossing. So this bodes the chance, the possibility, and we don't want to get out above our skis, but it is possible that this is a really strategically important development, and it could portend more ground being taken, even though we're moving into those colder months.
Amazing. Now, I understand that that at least one F-16 has popped up in the air over Ukraine. Are those planes arriving?
They are due to arrive. There are reports that they're here. The Abrams main battle tank, that we know is out in the east and has been spotted there. So these are significant, these are, again, more significant developments at a time when the West's attention has been, and one could argue purposefully, distracted from some very good news for Ukrainian forces. The F-16 is a very powerful tool. If they can bring it to bear in force, it will be both effective in the air towards Russian air power, but also it will be able to affect things on the ground. So I want to say that the momentum is significant, but what is happening, these episodic and these kind of like developmental moments, the crossing of the river, more equipment coming in, these are things that, step by step by step are an advantage for the Ukrainians and a disadvantage for the Russians. The Russians still have a lot of soldiers here. There's a lot of talk about another mobilization happening. What that will mean internally within Russia, we'll have to wait and see.
Another draft, basically?
Another draft. Right. This would be a third round of drafts.
Right.
The first round saw a massive exodus. The second round was highly criticized, but nobody really did anything about it. Will a third round of grabbing a bunch of fighting age men, and I suspect not so fighting age, we're probably going to start seeing some, moving that age bracket up. Will that be the thing that spoils and makes Russia turn against Vladimir Putin? We know Vladimir Putin. In this week, there have been reports that he is not residing in the Kremlin anymore, that he's gone to one of his dachas, and the widespread speculation, both domestically within Russia and internally within, externally within Russia watchers, is that there's a very real fear in Vladimir Putin's camp of possible assassination. So in Moscow is becoming less hospitable to him, apparently, for one reason or another. Again, the speculation being that there's a fear of assassination. So he has either gone to his massive palace down in Sochi on the Black Sea, or he has another dacha kind of halfway between St. Petersburg and Moscow. Those are the two we know of, but he is a very wealthy man, very powerful, and he could be in a number of places. But it is distinctly interesting that he is no longer residing in the Kremlin. And again, there's this talk of the reason why he's left Moscow is because it's no longer safe for him.
There was a story
we'll have to see.
There was a story a couple of weeks ago that he had had a heart attack. By the way, we just have 45 seconds here, Phil.
Lots of stories of his health.
Has there been any evidence of that? I mean, has he been seen in public since those reports of his heart attack?
He has been seen in public, or what purports to be him. Of course, we do know that he used body doubles, but he has a health issue. There's some very serious health issues. We don't know exactly what it is, but things are not going well in Russia. It's not going well. It's not going great here in Ukraine. but there's some seedlings and some reasons for hope. It's just a shame that nobody's really reporting on it.
Yeah, I get it. And what's the latest in terms of Ukraine's response to the Republicans here in the United States who are withholding more foreign aid?
Very deep concern. There's concern that they're going to continue to politicize what's happening here in Ukraine for their own domestic policy, infighting between Republican and Democrat. Nobody appreciates that here in Ukraine, but they're still hopeful that even within the GOP, there are those who recognize the importance of maintaining and supporting Ukraine. They're still very hopeful for a victory and a return to 91 borders. They're just concerned that eyes are turning away from Ukraine, and they want to keep.
Phil Ittner, check out his video blog on YouTube.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Ittner Philip over on Twitter. Phil, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Great to see you. We'll be back. And welcome back. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Well, earlier today, you had mentioned a listener who a while back had responded to your challenge regarding finding something with the average American, and then he'd lost his email, and you wanted him to reach back out to you again. It stirred an idea in me. You've got such really smart listeners. I want to challenge a couple of them to come up with a list of things of what Dems have done for people in the past 100 years, or a list of things Republicans have done to benefit the ultra-rich in the past 7,500 years. Because I think the lists would be quite long and very illustrative of who's really on the side of Americans.
I agree. And we can do an awful lot of this just off the top of our heads. I mean, programs that Democrats promoted that Republicans opposed from the beginning. Child labor laws, unemployment insurance, the minimum wage, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Department of Occupational Safety and Health, the Environmental Protection Agency, I'm forgetting the acronym, but the agency that protects you from being ripped off by banks, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB. It is a huge list. In terms of what Republicans have done, the 3 massive tax cuts, actually 5 or 6 massive tax cuts. There were 2 of them during the Reagan years, maybe 3 of them. There was another huge one during George W. Bush's presidency and a smaller one. And then, of course, the Donald Trump $2 trillion tax cut. I don't know. Go ahead.
I think that spreadsheet would be very
revealing,
very interesting, very reviewing of who's really on American side.
Yeah, great suggestion. Sandra, thank you very much for that. Great idea. Mary in Seattle. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling because I really value your opinion in a lot of ways, but especially on this. And I wanted to know what your opinion would be on stopping arms to Israel. Because my anxiety and my ADHD are ramping up. I can't watch PBS News anymore. I can barely listen to Amy Goodman's show. It's like, But I mean, it's not just for me personally. It's for the people that are suffering in Gaza. So what do you think about stopping arms to Israel?
I've said this several times. I'm in favor of something like a ceasefire. I don't. Some people who are pushing a ceasefire are calling for basically, a unilateral stand down by Israel, and I'm not a fan of that. I do think, though, that they need to stop bombing civilians and start, going into tunnels and trying to get Hamas. And frankly, I've been saying this all along, they should have brought an international coalition into Gaza. It shouldn't just have been the Israeli army. In terms of whether the United States should be, funding or not funding or providing or not providing weapon systems to Israel, if we have any evidence that systems that we have provided are being used inappropriately or illegally, certainly that's a red line. And I think that there is evidence like that out there. But whether you just cut everything off or whether you start calibrating it, I don't know. Right now the situation is so fluid, Mary. It's just a real tough one to play armchair general. I got to run. Mary, thank you for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour, a national abortion ban is on the 2024 ballot. It may not look like it, but here's what the Republicans are up to. The Heritage Foundation has set out this Project 2025 plan. And according to Joan McCarter over at Daily Kos, one piece of that is resurrecting the Comstock Act. Now, the Comstock Act was passed in 1873. Mr. Comstock, I've actually written about him at some length, was a very weird, very prudish guy. And the Comstock, and he was offended, at that time, he was offended by basically what you call burlesque performances. They weren't even, strip performances, but he was, and he used to go, he lived in New York, and he would go to Chicago where this was going on. He would take the train to Chicago or fly to Chicago just to spend hours every day at these strip clubs, at these burlesque performances, watching these women take their clothes off so that he could rail about it. Or at least that's what he said. But anyhow, the Comstock Act, which is still on the books, makes it a crime to mail any, quote, instrument, substance, drug, medicine, or thing that could be used in an abortion. And, the mail is how these things get to hospitals, too. And there's an interpretation of the Comstock Act that mail would include FedEx and UPS and things like that. It doesn't specifically say the United States Postal Service, which in its current form didn't even exist in 1873. I mean, there was a post office, but it wasn't this private public, Louis DeJoy run thing like we've got now. So, and this, by the way, when Matthew Kaczmarek, the right-wing crackpot judge down in Amarillo, Texas, ruled that America has to ban mifepristone, one of the two abortion drugs, he based it on the Comstock Act. Now, that's been put on hold by the federal courts, but according to reports about Project 2025 and things out of the Republican Party, and certainly, MAGA Mike, uber Christian MAGA Mike, they're all talking about reviving the Comstock Act. And frankly, Democrats don't have the power to repeal it right now because Republicans control the House of Representatives. So keep a close eye on this. I'm fully expecting, if Republicans acquire any more power in this upcoming election, and particularly if they take the White House and the Senate, they're going to roll out the Comstock Act and they're going to ban birth control and abortion pills nationwide. So you heard it here first. We'll be back. It is amazing. It's now illegal to be gay in Tennessee.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or at least in one city in Tennessee. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break, and I'll pick up your calls. Stay with us.
Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest export, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778 provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, In an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So Vivek Ramaswamy, during the first Republican debate, was laying out his vision for America and by the way, he was the #2 guy in the debate, according to the Washington Post, in which he was arguing that we should basically do away with all of our federal agencies. Really, virtually all of them. Just shut them down and make them go away. He's not the first person to argue this. David Koch, running on the Libertarian ticket in 1980 for vice president, was arguing the same thing. He had a long list of federal agencies he wanted to shut down. This is not an uncommon thing among billionaires, and Ramaswamy is a billionaire. They basically want to take America back to the 1920s, before we had what they call a welfare state. And if they do so, they will turn America into a failed state. They want to make America into something like Haiti or Libya, and that would be a disaster. There's a whole article about it that you can read all the details. It's titled, Is Vivek Ramaswamy a Different Kind of Republican Cat? At HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So it's now illegal to be publicly gay in Murphysboro, Tennessee. How's your friggin' morning going? Rule of Claw notes over on Daily Kos. This is grim stuff. Murphysboro passed an ordinance in June banning indecent behavior. It includes, quote, indecent exposure, public indecency, lewd behavior, nudity, or sexual conduct. And sections 21 through 72 of the city code, or section 21-72, I guess, states that, quote, public indecency or sexual behavior includes being gay, not having gay sex in public. Nobody's talking about that. Just publicly, essentially proclaiming your homosexuality. And anyone who violates this law in Murphysboro, Tennessee, is barred from hosting public events or selling goods and services at public events for 2 years. They don't throw you in jail. They just ostracize you from society, essentially. Anyone who violates the ordinance in the presence of minors is barred for 5 years. And the city officials are going ahead with this. Last Monday, the Rutherford County Steering Committee met to discuss removing all books that might potentially violate the ordinance from the public library. Not the school, the public library. And that would, of course, be all books that have any mention of homosexuality in them, particularly in a positive light. But, hey, it's now illegal to be gay in Murphysboro, Tennessee. It's just bizarre. And finally, Republicans have a crazy new deep state theory. I mentioned this briefly yesterday. Clay Higgins on Wednesday resurrected the conspiracy theory that the FBI was behind the January 6th attacks. He said he was interviewing Christopher Wray at the Homeland Security Committee, House Homeland Security Committee, and he says, do you know what a ghost vehicle is, Director? You're the director of the FBI. You should certainly know what a ghost bus is. Wray says, I don't know what you're talking about. So Higgins says, it's a vehicle that's used for secret purposes. It's painted over. And then he shows a picture of a bunch of buses at Union Station, and 2 of them have darked out windows. They're probably just tinted, you know. But anyhow, he says, these buses are nefarious in nature and were filled with FBI informants dressed as Trump supporters deployed onto our Capitol on January 6th. Your day is coming, Mr. Wray. This is the new Trump humper Republican conspiracy theory that the January 6th was done by the FBI. Good luck with that. I don't recall a single person being arrested who it turned out to be an FBI agent or even being identified. There's, I mean, literally thousands of people across the United States who are working on these crowdsourced projects to identify the people in the pictures from January 6th so that they could be prosecuted. Probably half of them have been identified this way. Not a single one of them was an FBI guy. The one guy that the right wing thought they had as an FBI informant, a poor guy by the name of Ray Epps, and they all went nuts on him, and Fox, trashed him and said, oh, this is the FBI. Turns out he wasn't an FBI informant at all. Had nothing to do with it. Whew, amazing. All right, let's pick up your calls here. Tom in New York City. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I think I have a Republican law that benefited everybody.
Okay. All right. What is it?
I hope it's not a low-hanging fruit, but I'm going to...
I was curious if you have read the book called March of Folly by Barbara Tuchman.
I have not.
It is a treatise on how the artists and thinkers and writers of the day knew what was coming before, and let me get my thoughts together because, I mean, this is so surprising. I did not expect ever to, this is one of, I never expected to be able to talk to you in person like this. But it's a treatise on how people would see what was coming, and the government, people in power, were completely oblivious. It covers the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and I believe the Civil War and Vietnam as well. And it's an extremely good book, and in a way, it actually points out what's happening today. We're in a march of folly, where people see that all of this wealth in too much in too few hands, and all of the things that are happening around us is leading us into a period of real violence and extremes.
Yeah.
But it seems that our government and our leaders don't see it. They're oblivious to it. And if they do see it, they don't care.
Right, or they don't want to acknowledge it.
Exactly.
Willful ignorance.
So, I mean, it's a book that I just came across it by accident myself and years ago. And it's a book I would highly recommend anybody if you want to
give me the title and author again here, Richard.
Today. Pardon?
Title and author again?
Barbara Tuchman.
Mm-hmm. And the title was?
March of Folly.
March of Folly. Okay, I'll have to check it out. Richard, thanks for the heads up on that. I'm completely unfamiliar with it, but I certainly get the implications of it. Thank you. Rick in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Well, thank you for your years of service to our nation and the truths you've revealed. On my mind is the Washington Post article today, a rare look at the devastation caused by AR-15 shootings. And it's a weapon of war. And basically, the bullet upon impact tumbles, causing catastrophic damage. So making these weapons of war extensively available can be described as no other than evil by any moral person. But there's 20 million of them in the hands. So what can be done to mitigate this?
I think we need to outlaw them and buy them back.
Oh, well, we can try that.
It worked in Australia.
Could be taken. It did.
Yeah, it did.
I heard it on your program.
Yeah.
But you could possibly modify the ammo for civilian use to decrease its velocity, require the guns to be insured, strengthen lawsuits against states and local communities that do not act to keep the firearms out of the hands of mentally ill or violent persons. Mm-hmm. Or the NSA tracks communications throughout this land and plows through the internet to try to stop foreign terrorists. Why can't they track and mitigate these events? But the thing that you're going to come up against, which you have well documented, is the myth backed up by decades of information from the right-wingers about the First Amendment. But I believe that weapons cartels, and I include, those that sell them to civilians that peddle these weapons in our nation and across the globe, are no less immoral than drug cartels that peddle fentanyl. So I'm writing my congressman, and somehow we have to get this stuff mainlined, but not only on this issue, all of the issues that you raised, Thom Hartmann. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rick. I like your ideas. I've been a fan for a long time of regulating guns the same way we regulate cars. You have a right to transportation in the Constitution, more or less. And you have a right to own a car, but you don't have a right to own a car and drive it on a public road without license, registration, and insurance. And I think we should be doing the same thing with guns, but that's just me. Rick, thank you. Dee in Hudson Valley, New York. Hey, Dee, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Love your show.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a chance and say Nixon for the EPA in 1970.
It was not proposed by Republicans. In fact, I believe Nixon vetoed it the first time around. So,
well, I tried. I dug deep.
It was definitely opposed by Republicans.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome, Dee. Keep trying. I'm telling you, it's going to be a challenge. Yeah, I mean, you have to go through 30, 40 years of history to find even one minor. I mean, the one thing that the one guy found was the no call list. He said that's a benefit. And I sort of gave it to him. I sent him a book, but really the reason for that was, the people who were legitimately running these industries, they wanted to put out of business their small competitors.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Michael in Northfield, Vermont. Hey, Michael, I used to live in Northfield, Vermont. It's a great town.
I'm living a tenth of a mile from Stony Brook Road, and I'm less than a mile from you. We lived up somewhere on Gibb Road and Little Northfield.
Yeah,
Road.
we lived in the old Long Way Inn.
Yeah. So anyway, I have bad news to pass along that Scott passed away. Scott and Patty Manning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from cancer about 6 years ago.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I called you once earlier, but I didn't realize that you had lived in Northfield. And I don't know if we know each other from the past, but I'm calling today to bring up a point that the Democrats have to become proactive now to expose Joe Manchin's voting record and all the things he's done to curtail the bills the Democrats are able to pass to show that he's just been a thorn in the side of a party and how badly he's turned his back on them.
Yeah. Well, here's what might be good news, Michael, in that regard. Kirsten Sinema in Arizona, they're doing some really good in-depth polling right now in Arizona. And what they're finding is that she is pulling way more votes away from Kari Lake, away from the Republican, than she is from Ruben Gallego, the Democrat who's going to be running against her. So it looks like these, Democrat and name-only candidates like her and Joe Manchin, when they run for political office, now that they've been basically outed, they're going to get more Republican votes, but they're not going to get. They're losing the Democrats' votes.
Okay, I have one more thing to add. I think it's a shame and almost an act of treason for the way the public, the press and the government has turned their back on Ukraine, period.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't call it treason, but I think it's
I have nothing
terrible.
good to say about that.
Yeah. No,
we don't. I mean,
yeah, and
every dollar we send to Ukraine, the Russians spend and lose hundreds.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good deal for us.
Yeah, I think actually the number. I think it's like a 7-to-1 ratio I saw at one point. But yeah, it's certainly not 1-to-1. And we have degraded their military in ways that we never could have done if we just set out to do it. I mean, the Ukrainians are doing it for us. So yeah, excellent points, Michael. Thank you very much for the call. Brian in Tacoma. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Yeah, hi. You get a lot of calls about people like, oh, the healthcare in Canada is great compared to America. Oh, the healthcare in Canada is horrible compared to America. I mean, you got one today. and it's always a little tricky to answer. I don't think it's that difficult. As far as I lived in Canada for 2 years and was on their healthcare system, I didn't have anything major happen. But I generally had, good care for the minor things I had. But anyways, it's very simple. Our starting point in America is with nothing. The more we pay, the better our healthcare system becomes. And their starting point is with something, and they all have the ability to pay more if they want to. They have private health insurance in that country as well.
Right.
But most of them that complain about their public health care system, if you would say, oh, but you could pay more, they would be like, what? I'm not paying more for health insurance. And they're right to say that. But it's pretty simple.
So it's like comparing American public schools to high-end British or high-end private school, to one of these.
But they start ahead of us.
Yeah, I get it. Excellent point, Brian. Brilliant. Brilliant, actually. Thank you. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Nate in Hinsdale, Illinois. Hey, Nate, what's up?
Carpentersville, Illinois, Tom.
Oh, Carpentersville. Okay, I'll change that. Thank you.
It's in the same area. I, as usual, love your conversations with Philip Ittner. And my question is this. At the very end of your conversation, did you make reference to the possibility that Putin has had a heart attack?
Yeah, there was a report 2 weeks ago, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe 3, that he had had a heart attack. And for a day or so, it was being reported all around the world. And then they came out and denied it and all that kind of stuff. But I hadn't seen any reports about him showing up in public since then. Apparently he has.
No, he hasn't. You know what Radar Online is?
What? I'm sorry, say it again?
Radar Online.
Radar Online. No, I don't.
I like you, have every week I go and I hit Putin Health. And accordingly, he suffered a real heart attack in October and died on October the 26th. Of course, they want to cover it up. But I read this fellow, he's another reporter like Philip. He said that the Putin double is an idiot. Therefore, most of them are, it's not Putin. If he is dead. But anyway, I've been, every week I go and I on Google Putin Health just to see if I get more responses like.
Yeah, I'm skeptical that he's dead. It wouldn't surprise me if he had a heart attack. He's 71, 2, 3, something like that.
But they're covering, his allies there are covering it up because it could cause a revolution within
I don't think
Russia.
so. I think if he died, I think that there's probably a secession plan in place. I don't know if it involves Medvedev, but
yeah, I think you're correct. I've also read that. But anyway, I really thoroughly enjoy Thursdays when you and Philip visit.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Nate. We'll continue doing it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thanks for the feedback. Yep, good talking to you. Vladimir in Concord, California. Hey, Vladimir, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, so listen, I just wanted to chime in really quickly on what you were talking about earlier with younger people, mainly kind of the I forget the term you used, but Gen Z, considering leaving the country.
Yeah.
I myself am, I guess the term is like elder millennial. And recently I've honestly thought about it myself. And I know there's younger people, I guess, I hate to call ourselves older, but older people who are considering the same thing. And, for us, it's not necessarily the cost of education, because many of us have already gone through it. Some of us have student loans, some of us don't. But for me, the thing that's what's impacting my thought process is the fact that in America we have really bad laws in regards to workers. You know what I mean? And what really sent us down this path is, unfortunately, I was laid off from my job on Monday, and in many European countries, if this were to happen, they have to give you a massive severance package just to get you to, to be compliant with the laws. Plus, their unemployment
higher levels
so
of
much better. You don't
employment security.
Right, and you don't have to worry about health insurance. You don't have to worry about any of that. Right. Whereas in America, there's no requirements for a company to do anything for you. And once you're unemployed, our unemployment insurance in this country is paltry compared to the rest of the world. Yeah. So, there's a lot of people, in my age group that are thinking, why are we even here working for, the betterment of the billionaire class and the executives when our employer can just decide, we don't need you anymore, goodbye, and then we're left struggling to try to figure out what we're going to do. Whereas we can go to a country in Europe, in Canada, and have such better protections for ourselves, for our
job
family.
security and good benefits.
Why would we want to?
Yeah, no, I get it.
Why would we want to stay in this country?
Well, it just 6 months ago, Louise and I visited dear friends of ours in Portugal. They used to live in Florida, and they said, "That's it, we're out of here." And we're not just out of Florida. They have moved to Portugal, and they about a year and a half ago, I think, and they're applying for citizenship right now. I mean, it's a 3-year process, and they're in their 70s. But they're just like, we're over it. And they don't feel safe. They didn't, he was an executive in a progressive news organization, and he feels like he's got a target on his back. And in fact, he's working with other progressives across Europe to create a kind of an underground railroad in the event that Donald Trump becomes president, and they start, rounding up and arresting high-profile progressive people in the media. So, which would be me. So I was pleased to hear about that. I didn't even know about this until and we're sitting in his apartment in Portugal, looking over the ocean, and he's telling me about this, and I'm like, holy cow! but yeah, it's happening all over.
Well, Tom, I'm happy to hear that, in the event that Trump becomes president and they come after somebody like you, that you're going to have a way to get out.
Well, maybe not.
Like yours to fight back.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe not. We'll see. I have a feeling they're not going to give me a lot of advance notice before they swoop in. That's probably not how it's going to play out, but we'll see. Vladimir, thanks for the calls. Nice to hear from you. We'll be right back on the other side of this break. Dr. Michael Mann, what's going on with our climate and this latest report that just came out from the government on Tuesday?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available my subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us, our old friend Michael Mann, Dr. Michael Mann, the distinguished professor and director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania, the author of numerous books, most recently Our Fragile Moment, How Lessons from Earth's Past Can Help Us Survive the Climate Crisis. Michael Mann with 2Ns.net is the website, and Twitter handle Michael E. Mann. Dr. Mann, welcome back to the program. I wanted to, James Hansen's most recent paper, it appears to me that what he's saying is that if it weren't for the aerosols that we're throwing into the atmosphere, the particulate matter that is reflecting sunlight back out, that warming levels that would approach what we saw during the PETM. Am I misinterpreting that?
Hey, Tom, it's always good to be with you. You know, I think that the Hansen et al. Paper has been widely sort of misunderstood in a lot of the coverage. And so I think the actual scientific message has been somewhat lost and distorted. And I think there is a lot of confusion about what it actually claims. And the basic premise of your question or your point is correct. There is this additional warming that has been masked by sulfur dioxide pollution, particulate matter that reflects back sunlight and so has a cooling effect. And as we clean up the environment, as we move away from dirty coal burning, for example, which has been the case in Western countries, there's still a fair amount of dirty coal burn in developing countries like India. As we move away from that, we're removing that masking cooling that had been present. And so there's an extra bit of warming there. It is probably in the range of a few Celsius, a half a degree or so Fahrenheit. So that's the extra warming that we would get on top of the warming from carbon dioxide pollution. But what's also true is that we get cooling from the disappearance of black carbon. Black carbon also comes from coal burning. It absorbs incoming sunlight, and so it has a warming effect. And so as we get away from dirty coal burning, yes, there's less of that sulfur particulate pollution, and that's a warming effect, but there's less of that black carbon, and that's actually a cooling effect. And we also expect other greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide, but methane and nitrous oxide, surface ozone, which is a surface pollutant from photochemical smog. We expect those to also come down as we sort of phase out those activities. And so the net effect is that all of those other things, at least to first order, pretty much cancel. And what we're left with is the warming from the carbon dioxide pollution. So we need to keep our eyes on the ball. It really is the carbon dioxide from fossil fuel burning that is primarily the problem when it comes to sort of the committed warming that we face. And there's a little bit of good news here too. There was another study that came out actually a week later, a week after the Hansen et al. Study, that shows that there's increased confidence now in the conclusion that when we bring carbon emissions to zero, the surface warming stops. And so there is this immediate consequence of our efforts to decarbonize our economy. And there's a little bit of good news there. As I like to say, the truth is bad enough. The truth is that the planet will continue to warm, and all of these impacts will continue to get worse as long as we continue fossil fuel burning. It isn't that tough. What we have to do is to stop doing that, is to get off fossils as quickly as we can.
Yeah. Well, there's this globally absorbed solar radiation issue. I mean, the fact of the matter is the sun is still throwing heat at us. It's sort of like, you know, your body produces heat, right? And you're laying in bed and you got 2 blankets on you, and that's just right. And then somebody comes along and puts 2 more blankets on top of you, and suddenly you're too hot. You know, if they take away...
dog. Your dog
exactly.
To sleep on you. Yeah.
Exactly. But at that point, and then they say, you know, for the next year, I'm going to put another blanket on you every week or every month, and pretty soon you're going to end up with 10 or 12 blankets on you, and you're going to be really too hot. But you know, if you've got 8 or 9 blankets on you at this point, and the person who's dumping them on you in this imaginary hospital bed or whatever says, okay, I'm going to stop now, no more blankets, you still have too many blankets. I mean, it's still too hot. Isn't that kind of where we're at with all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? I'm seeing these numbers from from NASA. This is from the CERES, C-E-R-E-S, the satellite thing. And it shows that the amount of solar radiation that the Earth absorbs right now is more than 2 watts per square meter higher than it was just in 2009. I mean, that's pretty breathtaking.
Yeah, I mean, so there are a number of things going on here. We're sort of melting the ice, and as we melt away ice, the surface of the planet absorbs more of the incoming sunlight. And that's one of the important positive feedbacks. That's why...
Which is not a good thing when you say positive.
Which is not a good thing, right? Despite the name. It's an aggravating effect. It is a... it's a vicious cycle, if you like. And so that's built into the climate model. So that is part of what the climate models predict. And you're absolutely right about the blanket analogy. All else being equal, there would be this, what we call thermal inertia. The fact is that the surface would continue to warm up for some time just from the carbon pollution we put into the atmosphere. And that's been understood for some time. What we now understand from somewhat more sophisticated Earth system models is there is an offsetting factor there. And the offsetting factor is that when we stop putting carbon pollution into the atmosphere, the level of carbon dioxide slowly starts to come down because the oceans are absorbing some of that carbon dioxide and the plants on land are absorbing some of that carbon dioxide. So there is this blanket effect, this thermal inertia that would cause but then there is this drawdown effect which actually would cause some cooling. The two things nearly cancel out. And so what you're left with is that when you stop putting carbon pollution into the atmosphere, the surface of the planet temperature that you're at. So the bad news is it's going to be hard to cool the planet back down. The warming that we've seen so far is pretty much baked in, at least for decades to come, unless we engage in some sort of technology to actively draw down the carbon using artificial means. But What is also true is that the surface warming, which is behind the intensification of these weather events that we're seeing, stronger hurricanes, that will stop getting worse when we stop putting carbon pollution into the atmosphere. So again, there's urgency. We need to do this quickly. We need to decarbonize our economy very quickly if we're going to prevent a catastrophic 3-degree Fahrenheit warming of the planet. There's a shrinking window of opportunity to do that. But there's also agency. It is still possible for us to do that.
You just said 3 degrees Celsius, or are we
3
changing
Fahrenheit, 1.5 Celsius,
okay.
3 Fahrenheit.
Okay.
Yep.
Now I'm also, again, from this CFSV2 average T anomaly temperature 1979-2000 base, again from NASA. The northern hemisphere is 1.7 degrees Celsius above the 1979 to 2000 average, and has been for 139 days. It's a record streak. Now, this is not, a brand new global annual average. It's a streak that appears to be tied to El Nino and heat coming out of the ocean. But what does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, so what it means is, that 1.5, and again, I want to make sure to clarify the numbers because it can be confusing. We often talk about 1.5 Celsius. We tend to still think in Fahrenheit here in the States. And so that's roughly 3 degrees Fahrenheit. But that 1.5 Celsius number, when we talk about the devastating consequences of exceeding that amount of warming, what we're talking about is the trend line. When the trend line permanently crosses that threshold, then we've baked in some truly devastating consequences beyond the damaging effects that we've already seen. But before that happens, we're going to cross that threshold temporarily. We've already crossed it. Months ago, we crossed it, for the first time for a month. Now, we're crossing it, say, for several months in a row. The real problem will be when we cross it permanently, and we can prevent that from happening. So yes, the Earth will temporarily exceed that 1.5 Celsius threshold because of the extra spike of warmth, for example, from an El Nino event. It'll temporarily go above that, and then it'll come back down when that El Nino event ends. What we're really worried about is when it doesn't come back down, when it's permanently above that level, when the trend is 1.5 Celsius. And that'll happen in a matter of 1 to 2 decades if we don't bring those carbon emissions down dramatically. So we can prevent crossing that threshold, but the window of opportunity to do that is getting shorter and shorter.
Dr. Mann, can you stick around a little bit? I've got a couple other questions for you. Great. Okay, thank you so much. We're talking with Dr. Michael Mann. MichaelMann.net is his, Mann with 2 N's at the end is his website. His latest book, Our Fragile Moment, How Lessons from the Earth's Past Can Help Us Survive the Climate Crisis. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're talking with the distinguished professor and director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Michael Mann. And Dr. Mann, I don't believe that we've done an interview with you about your book, your new book, Our Fragile Moment, have we? I
think we might have talked about it a little bit before it came out, but I don't think we've talked about it since it actually came out. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it for the next 3 or 4 minutes here, at the very least. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks. I think we all feel how fragile this moment is, right? I'm talking about climate, specifically the climate crisis. But our world is, you cover in your show so adeptly. We're at this fragile moment with respect to global politics, instability, conflict, some of which is inflamed by climate change, right? So what the book is about is sort of looking to the past and seeing what lessons we can learn from Earth's past that inform our assessment of how fragile this moment is and whether we can still preserve it. And one of the things that I do is I look at past natural warming events that were driven by natural releases of carbon dioxide. And they can tell us something about the climate system, about how sensitive it is to carbon dioxide. That has direct implications for us now because, of course, we're warming the planet by adding carbon dioxide, not from long-term changes in outgassing, but from fossil fuel carbon pollution. And what those past episodes can do is tell us, are our models getting it right? And this relates to our previous discussion, because when we look at what happened in the past, how much warming there was in response to these natural events, it turns out that collectively it really does sort of enforce the findings from current generation climate models. The climate models seem to be getting it right. We call it climate sensitivity. How much warming do you get for a given increase in carbon dioxide? The models appear to be getting that right. So that's the good news, is the models are providing us meaningful guidance, and they provide us meaningful guidance on what we need to do, again, to prevent crossing those dangerous thresholds. That having been said, we also see from the past, while there's evidence of sort of stabilizing factors in the climate, and we see that play out over years, and I literally try to summarize 4 billion years of Earth history and the lessons from that in a couple hundred pages. It's a challenge. But while some of the episodes from the past reinforce the resilience of the climate system, that there are sort of stabilizing factors that are helpful to maintaining climate balance, and life plays an important role in that, we also see examples where Earth did sort of spin out of control. And the most profound example was actually not a dramatic warming scenario, but a dramatic cooling scenario. Snowball Earth, 2.5 billion years ago, when a rapid increase in oxygen from newly developed photosynthetic organisms scavenged all of the methane that was very stable in the early Earth atmosphere, caused a dramatic cooling, the buildup of ice, and the planet became encased in ice. It's snowball Earth is what we call it. Life probably survived in hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean and in shallow pools of water on the frozen tropical ocean. So it gives you an idea that while there's resilience, there's also fragility. And what we have to ask ourselves is, which do we want to be? Do we want to be that stabilizing factor because we still have the ability to be that? Or do we want to be the destabilizing factor? It's still up to us.
Brilliant. We'll be back in 60 seconds. Change starts with you can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. We're talking with Dr. Michael Mann. Dr. Mann, there was a report, well, actually, before I get to that, the heat index in Brazil hits 137 degrees Fahrenheit. Red alerts have gone out across the entire country of Brazil as the heat index hit 137. It's made it impossible for most people to carry out their normal lives. Power outages, people can't work, can't run errands, they can barely sleep, and it's not even summer there yet. What is going on in the Southern Hemisphere?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, global warming and El Nino, and the two of them are combining to give us this unprecedented heat. And that's the way that's the way we're going to cross thresholds, because there's this steady ongoing ramp warming trend. But we are going to pass certain thresholds when you have an El Nino event, for example, that occurs on top of that, and it pushes us above some warming level that we haven't seen before. We're seeing that with extreme weather events, where heat waves are getting more common, more frequent, more intense. We're seeing rainfall events, precipitation events that are more intense, more flooding. The warming dries out the ground in the summer in the extratropics, and we get worse droughts. And the warming oceans fuel stronger storms, hurricanes, and superstorms. And so all of that gets worse as long as we continue to warm the planet. And what we're starting to see, Tom, when you start to cite some of these specific examples, we're seeing the signal emerge from the noise, which is to say, we used to be able to say, well, there's weather, and weather's going to happen, and hot days are going to happen, and floods are going to happen. But now we can start to point to those events, and we can say, that's an event that would not have happened if we had not warmed the planet. And we have tools to do that now. Called detection and attribution. We can actually take a particular event, assess how likely the absence of our warming of the planet, and how likely it is because of that warming. And we can show that many of these devastating extreme events simply wouldn't have been as extreme as they are in the absence of human-caused warming. So we're really seeing the toll now of human-caused warming play out in terms of devastating events that are causing great economic damage, and they're taking lives. We are starting to see increased mortality now from human-caused warming.
I totally get it. We have about a minute and a half here, by the way. The federal government just released the 5th National Climate Assessment. Now, it comes out every 4 years. Donald Trump buried on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, so nobody would know about it. But Biden, highlighted it. And well, you want to summarize what it has to say in the minute or so, 2 minutes we have left?
Sure thing. And the irony, of course, is when the Trump administration tried to bury it, that actually created an even more compelling media narrative. Here's the report that the Trump administration doesn't want you to see. So I think it actually ended up getting more coverage than it might otherwise have gotten because of that. There was some just desserts in that. But you're absolutely right. The Biden administration has taken a more proactive role. And look, these reports, in some sense, can never be too surprising because they're summarizing the science that's already been done and the impacts that we're already seeing. So it's really an opportunity to take stock and to say, like I was saying before, this report in very blunt terms states that many of these devastating extreme weather events, we can change. These billion-dollar events, extreme weather events that cost billions of dollars, and of course they're taking lives as well. We can directly say now that climate change is causing these events to be so extreme, to do so much damage, to take so many lives. And that's what the latest national assessment report tells us. It tells us sort of what we already feel in our gut, what we already know, that we are seeing the devastating consequence of climate change now. And at this point, it's a question of how bad we are willing to let it get.
There you go. The great Dr. Michael Mann, his latest book, Our Fragile Moment, How Lessons from Earth Survived the Climate Crisis. You can check out his website at michaelmann.net. Dr. Mann, thank you so much for dropping by. It's always great talking.
Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Great having you with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll be back with your calls after this break. Stay with us.
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight of St. Louis and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War. The other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American black shirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow black shirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. Arrived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Narcy in Fresno, California. Hey, Narcy, what's on your mind today?
Well, I had to call in after that woman called who was criticizing Canada's national health care system. But my husband and I were vacationing in Florence, Italy in late 2019, and I hit my head really hard. I knew I had to go to the hospital. And I was in and out of the hospital in Florence, Italy in just under 2 hours with 4 stitches and a CT scan. And the whole thing cost a little bit less than 140 euros.
Wow.
It was just the most positive experience. I have spent so many hours in ERs with my parents in the past few years. And I don't think I've ever been in and out of there in anything less than about 6 hours before. Yeah. And everybody was friendly. The patients were friendly. It was not busy. It was just an amazing experience. I came out of that and I thought, you know, my God, why do we have to put up with the system that we have now? And the other thing is I knew somebody who was from Canada several years ago who moved here for his wife to go to school. And he kept complaining about our healthcare system. He said it's just nuts the way our healthcare system works. Yeah. And he was very positive about the Canadian healthcare system. So, you know, I don't know what's wrong with people, but, you know, this is something that really needs to be changed.
France spends 32% of their federal budget on health care. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. France's 32% of their budget is on social programs and things like that. Here in the United States, it's 19%. And, you know, that's the difference. They have a well-funded, you know, highly functional national healthcare system, and we have nothing like that here. It's just very straightforward. And, you know, we just need to spend more of our GDP or of our federal budget on healthcare, frankly. Narcy, thank you for sharing the story with us. That's a great one. Mark in Long Beach, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Oh, good morning, Mr. Hartmann. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about someone could receive a book if they could name something that the Republicans have passed that would benefit people.
A piece of legislation that was written by Republicans, introduced by Republicans, passed with a majority of Republicans, and signed into law by a Republican president.
Well, I thought of something, but maybe you might say it doesn't qualify. But if it doesn't qualify, it's okay. And I just have one other quick thing to add to it. This is it. 2003, the Medicare Prescription Part D, signed by George Bush.
That was part of the Medicare Modernization Act that brought us Medicare Advantage. So I would not say that that worked to the advantage of pretty much anybody other than the the health insurance industry.
Oh, well, at least I tried. But
yeah.
but it is
good try, Mark.
Something that, yeah. The second thing I wanted to tell you briefly is, Tom, the last 5 presidents, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, when they took the oath of office, they had the Senate and the House with them. I'm really worried that the presidency and the Senate is going to fall to the Republicans. My only hope is that the Democrats can gain the House. That way, if Trump gets put in, he won't be able to pass these huge tax cuts. Do you agree with me?
Well, he wouldn't pass huge tax cuts, but he would have the power to turn America into a country that none of us would recognize. So I see no upside to Trump being in the White House at all, or frankly, today, pretty much any Republican. It seems like they're all in on this fascism experiment that they want to do. Let's just end the American experiment, replace it with authoritarianism. I
agree with you 100%. The only reason why I said that it'd be nice if the Democrats at least got the House is because that way they couldn't ban abortion, they couldn't ban this, they couldn't ban that. That's the only reason.
I think there's a good chance the Democrats will take the House back. They may lose the Senate. All of the seats that are up for grabs right now are Democratic senator seats. The Republican Senate seats are all pretty safe. So this is going to be a bad cycle for the Senate. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. Mark, thank you for the call.
You are a gentleman.
Thank you, Mark. Good talking to you. Regina in Chicago. Hey, Regina, what's on your mind today?
When you were talking earlier, hi, Tom.
Hi there.
I'm in my car. Can you hear me?
Just fine, yes.
Oh, good. I was laughing. I was in my car. I'm driving in rush hour traffic trying to get to work. But when you were talking earlier that you were visiting your friend and we can't be on the radio with this la-di-da talk about that if Trump gets in office, that anybody would be coming to get you. Okay, you talking about your friend, talking about some underground stuff. We can start our own underground things here. I can put you up in one of my properties and you can still broadcast, and we're not going to have that.
I may take you up on it, Regina.
Look, let me tell you,
I love Chicago.
Not gonna happen. Yeah, I miss you coming here because I used to be at all of your functions when you would come in. You haven't been here since
COVID.
Right before COVID. Right before COVID, you were here March 2nd or 3rd or whatever that was.
Yeah, one of these days I'll get brave enough to pop my head up, and I've got a book that's coming out in the fall of next year. The next one, the one I'm reading right now, about the hidden history of the American middle class, and it's going to be the last one in the series. It'll be the 10th one, and I probably by that time I'll feel a little safer to be doing a book tour. We'll see what happens.
And I completely understand, but I'll be there, and my brother and I were always there. We were usually the only 2 black people that would show up.
I remember, Regina. I remember.
You remember?
Yeah,
you
at
remember
that bookstore.
Right.
What was it? I'm forgetting the name of the bookstore now.
I forget the name of the bookstore, but yeah.
It was a great bookstore. Yeah. Okay, Regina.
Yeah, it really was.
Regina, thank you so much for the call.
You stay focused. Okay.
I'll do it
later.
Okay. Bye-bye. James in Portland. Hey, James. Thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Okay, Tom, I got to tell you a story how to stop these gun nuts in their tracks. I was listening to a discussion with John Stewart with one of these Second Amendment guys. Mm-hmm. And this guy says, well, we can't register guns because it's the Second Amendment. And John Stewart says, well, voting is the 15th Amendment, and they register voters. And the guy didn't.
I love it.
The guy didn't know what to say. He just stopped him dead.
Yeah. And the right to voting, by the way, according to the Supreme Court, is nowhere near as emphatic as the right to guns, which is bizarre. But that's a great one, James. That's a great one. Thank you very much for calling and sharing that with me. I do appreciate it. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing? You had that previous caller who mentioned either, modifying or outlawing those AR-15 bullets that tumble and cause such catastrophic injuries. Well, there is a historical legal precedent for doing so. During the Boer War from 1899 to 1902, the British used dum-dum bullets, which did the same thing, in the Hague Convention on War outlawed those bullets in either 1899 or 1907. So there is a legal historical precedent for doing that.
Really?
Yeah.
What? And they were called dum-dum bullets?
Dum-dum bullets, yeah. The British, when they outlawed them, they modified them so they didn't cause all that tumbling and do
Were
all
they they hollow point? Was that essentially what they were?
I think they split the tops of them or something like that.
Interesting.
But I'd have to, when remember during the Civil War, what a mini ball is?
I guess I don't. Fill me in. I thought that was just a name for the bullets.
French captain in the 1840s, and they were the main 58 caliber bullets during the Civil War, and they did the same thing and caused such catastrophic injury, broke bones and all that. So that's why they had so many amputations.
Interesting. So they would modify.
They didn't have to outlaw them because technology caught up, and they switched to breech loader rifles after that. So they didn't have to bother to outlaw them.
Right. Fascinating stuff.
I don't think anybody is going to, use a black powder single shot rifle to do any mass shootings.
Well, if we're going to, fully legalize guns, that would be where I'd draw the line. If you want to play originalist, then and you want to base everything on how things were in 1776, then let's go back to, you can have any gun you want as long as, it's a single shot flintlock.
Well, I have a couple of those.
I know, you've told me before, and I do the
competition. I keep up the good work, and I enjoy your show.
Thank you, George. Thank you so kindly. It's nice to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls. Actually, more of your calls right after this. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Just FYI, the guy who attacked Paul Pelosi, Nancy's husband, with a hammer was just convicted. And welcome back, Zeke in Portland. Hey, Zeke, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, have you heard that Mark Zuckerberg is allowing Donald Trump back on to Facebook and Instagram to hump the lie that the 2020 election was stolen? Have you heard about this?
I heard that last night on one of the MSNBC shows for the first time. Yeah, it was pretty. That and Elon Musk retweeting anti-Semitic propaganda. It's like, what the hell has happened to social media?
Well, both, in my opinion, both Zuckerberg and Musk are, if not just outright fascists themselves, they are fascist enablers. And people who are using those platforms like Facebook and Instagram might want to think about, leaving them in protest. Some of the analysis I've seen says that Trump, by being allowed to promote the big lie on these social media platforms, has the potential to destroy the 2024 election. I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, no, it is a big deal. And Trump successfully in 2016 used, Trump and Putin successfully used Facebook to get him into the White House in the first place. That was, Paul Manafort, who used to work for Vladimir Putin, took over $10 million from him, was running Trump's campaign, and he was giving to the Russians, to Russian intelligence services, secretly, the top secret polling information, the Republican polling information that was identifying which counties in the 5 swing states that Trump needed to win, which counties, actually identifying individual people that they should be targeting using Facebook and other social media. And they did. This is what they did, and you know, the consequence of it was that Donald Trump became president. I guarantee you, Zeke, they're going to do it again. They're already doing it right now.
The Russians, to be clear, the Russians were using data from Facebook.
Yep.
But the key thing there was they were using the software algorithm that was invented by the boy computer genius Christopher Wiley, the Canadian kid who invented this amazing software algorithm that was used by Cambridge Analytica. And Wiley was in the room when Alexander Nix, the guy who ran Cambridge Analytica, formerly known as Strategic Communication Labs in London, he gave the software algorithm and the Facebook data to two Russians.
Right.
And Wiley was like, "What's up is going on here?"
Yeah.
So the Russians.
And wasn't at that time Steve Bannon an executive with or had some affiliation with that company?
There's a chapter in Wiley's book, okay, which has that unfortunate title that has the F word in it. Okay. There's a chapter in the book called Steve from America, and it has to do with the Bannon brought $15 million from Robert Mercer, the hedge fund billionaire, okay? That converted SCL, Strategic Communication Labs, into Cambridge Analytica, the $15 million that Bannon brought from the Mercers.
Right.
And it's not good.
Yeah, I totally get it. Zeke, thanks for the call, and thanks for the information. I had read Chris Wiley's book back when I was writing my own book on Big Brother, but I didn't recall all of those details. I just more vaguely. Thank you for your excellent memory and for filling us in. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So Vivek Ramaswamy, during the first Republican debate, was laying out his vision for America. And by the way, he was the #2 guy in the debate, according to the Washington Post, in which he was arguing that we should basically do away with all of our federal agencies. Really, virtually all of them. Just shut them down and make them go away. He's not the first person to argue this. David Koch, running on the Libertarian ticket in 1980 for vice president, was arguing the same thing. He had a long list of federal agencies he wanted to shut down. This is not an uncommon thing among billionaires, and Ramaswamy is a billionaire. You know, they basically want to take America back to the 1920s, before we had what they call the welfare state. And if they do so, they will turn America into a failed state. They want to make America into something like Haiti or Libya, and that would be a disaster. There's a whole article about it that you can read all the details. It's titled, "Is Vivek Ramaswamy a Different Kind of Republican Cat?" at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here, Doug in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, this is Doug. Yeah, thank you so much for taking my call, and I just really enjoy your show. I really do.
Thank you.
I have something for you. Yeah, I do. I want to have something for you. I don't like this man, and I do lean a little right, but economically, but I'm very left socially. But I just want to throw this at you: the tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, actually helped me and my small business out quite a bit, and I'll tell you why. Because of the pass-through on that, I was able to give everyone a raise, and I went out and hired more employees because the pass-through encouraged me to increase my payroll, i.e. hire more people and give raises.
Pass-through allows you to take more money out of your company. How does that help your employees?
As a sole proprietor, okay, that pass-through is a deduction from my own personal income.
Right.
So
so you make more money.
It encourages me. Well, no, I do. Yes, sir. But I keep more of my money is really what I should.
What kind of business do you have, Doug?
But I own a very small insurance business.
Because I looked into that, and there was no way that I qualified for. This radio show is a business that I own, and there's no way that I could I could have used that. My understanding was it was only available to basically lawyers and stockbrokers.
No.
Was there a provision for
are you
insurance brokers?
No, it's a sole proprietor. I don't know if you're set up as a sole proprietor, but it did give me an opportunity and more cash to pass down to my current employees.
Okay,
So
I'm skeptical, but I'll take your word for it, Doug. Good luck with that. Larry in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I've been recently seeing an awful lot of polls indicating that Mr. Biden is in very serious trouble. I've been following this for a long time. I'm a hardcore progressive.
You realize, Larry, that at this time, 1 year from the election, Barack Obama was polling like down 17 points or something like that. It was very, very clear that there was no way he was going to win the election.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I'm familiar with that scenario. The problem is he's lost Michigan outright because of the almost unanimous withdrawal of support.
Yeah, I don't think he's lost Michigan. He might have lost a couple thousand votes in Dearborn, or maybe even a few 10,000 votes, but I don't think he's lost
250,000 last I heard. But let me finish. My friends are going to sit this election out, and they're extremely upset.
Yeah, your friends are idiots then.
They're extremely upset with the unqualified support of the president himself for what they consider mass murder in Gaza. And
well, this is he's not providing unqualified support. He went over to Israel and he said, please don't do what George W. Bush did. Don't go in and start bombing the crap out of people. He has been asking them to back off. I think he's put a fair amount of pressure on them. And if you got friends, Larry, that are going to sit out the election, what can I say? Screw them. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I think it's in line with pretty much everything. This idea that corporations have personhood. I know it's off the direct topic, but my feeling is I don't think incarceration is any answer whatsoever. It's just torturing people that are already PTSD. It's just makes them, and then you let them act on the street around your children. It's insane. But I would say if you cannot incarcerate something, how can you call it a person? Yeah. I think that would be a sound.
Well, it's the old saying, I'll believe a corporation's a person when Texas executes one. Yeah, I get it. James.
That's good.
James,
about a debt jubilee. Tom, it's in the Bible.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. James, I'm sorry I'm out of time. I got to run. But thanks so much for being with us today. And, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. It really does. And everybody you know. So get out there, get active, and make sure that you're registered to vote. And don't let your friends tell you that they're not going to vote. That's crime against democracy. And only an idiot would go along with that. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. You're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5-day in your inbox, no ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!